closer to the Patriots. Let's go to the last part.
No,
let's go to the last part.
Always, we appreciate you starting your day with us. Let's get into this morning's first conversation.
Is the country's healthcare system more at risk more than ever?
Why it has remained unaddressed for so long.
Political parties get lots of cash, big cash from financiers, and then when they get that now, you can't account for it.
But it's really the specialist nurses who we are in a greater shortfall for.
We can tap into the resources and have them, at least form some mentorship programs.
Highlight our food systems, and which will attract persons from all over the world to come and experience something that actually supports the local economy.
We're lucky that we have a vibrant legal system that allows change to take place, and it's not that matters are just swept under the carpet and discrimination is allowed to be perpetrated.
A lot of people don't know that there were attempts to ban the carnival, suppress the carnival.
WESN.
Did you see that rain yesterday? While it was raining water over here, it was raining something else on a pirogue in international waters. I'm being a bit facetious. We just don't know. But before we get into the other type of rain that rained fire down from the sky, let's just talk briefly about the fact that yesterday, certain parts of Trinidad flooded, hit by flash flooding, Marval, Diego Martin, and then other parts around the highway, and I haven't necessarily kept up with all of it. The main thing that I wanted to speak about on this is the fact that I appreciated the work that the government did when it now came on the scene. I appreciated the enthusiasm that they had in the beginning. But flooding is not an issue that can be guaranteed 100% solved, put to bed, never to be talked about again with a couple of weeks worth of work. Now, I'm not saying that the ministers involved only worked for a few weeks and then they just dropped the situation like a bad habit. But what I am saying is this is a constant reoccurring expenditure. It could be a clue as to one of the reasons why the PNMs, at least at some point, started to pull up short when it came to flood mitigation and flood prevention measures. And then, of course, the after effect and the cleanup and so forth. It almost seemed as though perhaps the previous administration just threw up their hands up in the air and said, it doesn't matter what we do, someone's going to flood, we'll just deal with the after effects because we think it's cheaper. Now, I would argue that that is not necessarily a good working theory, to be honest. And generally speaking, you would probably need proper analysis to accurately then say conclusively that would be the case if you ascribe to that sort of thinking. But this is not so much a complaint, it's more like, all right, current government, I understand, there are challenges, you have other things to say about flooding, it's not the only thing, but this is one of those things that directly affect the lives of the entire country, directly affects the productivity of the country, directly affects the quality of life of the country, and more importantly, if long-term solutions are not applied to the problem, not only would it persist, but in theory it would get worse, because at the end of the day, You never want to anticipate your urban centers shrinking. You never want to anticipate your development levels reducing. You never want to anticipate the amount of construction not only slowing down, but also then technically going into the negatives, because that's what it would take for the system to kind of solve itself. We built up certain areas we weren't supposed to build up, whether it was on reclaimed land, so we're putting concrete on reclaimed land, which is at a higher level than what would have been the coast behind it, and then we're like, why does the water not drain away? I wonder. Brr. And we're building in flood-prone areas, we're building on mountains and clearing away the trees. All of these things, very much an oversimplification, contribute to flooding. We are potentially blocking what would have been natural water courses, which may have flooded, but no one was living there, no one had a building there, so it didn't really matter to us at the time. No one was monitoring when it was a field of grass. But now we build on it without necessarily having any sort of planning. Notice how nobody speaks about, hey, we have this whole thing called town and country planning. And it seems as though the only thing they're good for is to be roadblocks for people who legitimately just want to develop their property. But to actually plan how we're urbanizing, because that's an ongoing, continuing, and ever upward trending effort. Nah, nowhere to be seen, apparently, allegedly. That's how it's perceived, or how it can be perceived. So there's certain things that need to be done, otherwise this problem ain't gonna go away. And then at the end of the day, if you could cut the amount of damage from flooding and the amount of times we flood, we'll be appreciative. But we can't say that the job would have been done. And again, how do you deal with the flooding in Port of Spain? You know, where do you cut a drain in that scenario? I don't know. Same thing with Woodbrook, right, near the stadium, because you built up land at a higher level than the Woodbrook area. Where does the water go? Well, figure something out. It's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be cheap, and you don't have to do it all at once, but you have to show us the effort. Otherwise, ultimately, you might be better than the other guy, but only slightly better than the other guy. And this is one of those things where slightly better is not necessarily always going to be good enough. It's just not. What I don't understand, though, is one would think there would be an incentive to compete, but the competition between the two parties really does not get us any sort of improved performance. They're not really trying to one-up each other when it comes to deliverables. And now we're going to kind of see how they treated flooding in the long run is potentially going to be an indicator on that statement. Because again, you could start literally one flood problem at a time. If you want to go with somewhere in Central, somewhere in the East-West corridor, if you want to go Port of Spain, if you want to go Woodbrook. You don't even have to try to solve a whole region, literally one small area at a time. But we're not really seeing, outside of, well, we'll clean the drains and the water courses. Yeah, that will help. That will help, but at some point, that's what the other guy said. Now, maybe he didn't do it properly. Maybe the PNM didn't clean out all of the water courses properly, maintain all the water courses properly. Some people said in certain areas, yes, they weren't doing it good at all, just the maintenance of the situation. That's fine. That's fine. But again, it's not the be-all and end-all. And let's be frank, you can't tell me we're doing well when the capital city, upon which a significant amount of the country comes into in order to work, is at constant risk of flooding. Because it's not that it's the capital or no, we have to put it up on a pedestal. It's the fact that a significant fraction of the population converges on the capital on a daily basis and works in or around the capital on a daily basis. So if the capital floods out whenever there is significant rain, that will affect a significant amount of the population. Not just their productivity at work, their ability to, if necessarily, handle their own personal business, not just their professional business. And then also significantly impacts their commute. But And that's just one area. If we want to not be called developing, third world and all of that, I don't know, this seems like an obvious thing that we should, you know, again, there was flooding in, I believe there was flooding in New York, there was flooding in American cities when your rain is heavy enough. You're not going to eliminate it to zero. But I mean, we don't get flooding only when a hurricane passes nearby. We know this. We get flooding when a cloud decides to sneeze for 15 minutes, and we get what we get. It's a hell of a way to live. And I rather not concede our inability and indirectly concede, oh no, we're just a little small island country, we will never reach a certain point. It's not because we can't. The question is it because we don't want to? And you might say, well, who doesn't want to? Well, at the end of the day, if the politicians could get away with doing, not necessarily solving a problem, one would argue the will of the people ain't really there, no matter how much you complain about it. So then it's not really just a politician problem, is it? Now, that said, there's something that I do need to address before it goes on too long. Now, of course, we had Independence Day, the Prime Minister gave her address. I'll just say what I have said about times like this in the last couple of years. I understand you want to have a positive message and all of that, and everybody is going to have their positive message. Cool. Now, she has again promised the government is committed to meeting the challenges that the country faces, but we need to see it. At some point, like, you can't not go through the process of giving out the message, whether it's independence, whether it's a religious holiday, what have you, right? It could be Eid, Diwali, Easter, Christmas, what have you. It could be International Women's Day, give out a message, Mother's Day, Father's Day, International Day, some International Day for Children, World Steel Pan Day, whatever the positive message is. You have to do it, I get it, that's just part of the job. But I think we need to kind of understand, like at this point in 2025, these messages are the baseline. You don't praise someone for doing it. You criticize them for not doing it because it's low-hanging fruit. It's very obvious this is what you do. I can't speak for the rest of the world. I could say in TNT, I am fed up of hearing all of these positive messages, and I am not seeing money where mouth is. And the thing with the current government, it's not fair to outright say they're doing a bad job. But I think it is fair to say it seems like they're losing momentum. Now, maybe, of course, they're hamstrung by the budget, so we have to wait and see, right? But in terms of leadership and messaging, setting the tone, setting expectations, guiding the population, hey, this is what we're trying to achieve, follow us here. We're not really getting enough of that. And in some cases, some of the policy decisions is the reverse. We're not getting the message of, this is how we're going to deal with crime. Yes, I understand you don't want to give out operational details, but strategic vision so that the population could be on board is not the same thing, always at least. But we're not necessarily getting that either. Again, it seems like it's nice that we have an operator in charge, but unfortunately, that position is not an operational position. That position is an oversight position, and a leadership position, and a public spokesperson position, and not really getting enough of those latter functions. So as much as, ironically, I'm not even necessarily complaining you're not doing enough right now, in certain aspects at least. I think at the end of the day, you need to figure out flooding a little bit better, but no. Rather, the main thing is, what I constantly have this concern that the Prime Minister is not present enough. No one voted as the leader of the country, the minister in the ministry of in the office of the Prime Minister. No one voted for him to be the spokesperson in the country. Right? That's one of the reasons why, arguably, the PNM lost. They had a candidate for leader that was, at least to some extent, rejected, partially because of how he was selected or appointed and how the campaign trail happened. And then, of course, you sprinkle in the previous leader's administration and the job performance overall of that cabinet. But to some extent, it was centered around the then leader, even Freudian slip by Penelope Beckles, but I believe it was corrected in the newspapers, Stuart Young, as a candidate, wasn't a good one, and they lost the election. The candidate that was accepted, at least by more voters, Kamala Prasad-Bissessar. So when we want to see leadership, that's who we want to see. There's a catch-22 with how she runs the UNC. A benevolent dictator, I've said this before. The implications of the implications are that there's a lot of things lacking leadership-wise outside of Kamala Prasad-Bissessar. Look, John Jeremy is a great pick for AG. No one is expecting leadership on certain levels from him, given the position that he's in and the context of how we got there. It's just not. It's not a natural fit with all of the details and circumstances that surround his appointment, right? So then who is supposed to be taking charge? Like I said, when you're a benevolent dictator, the implications are you concentrated power, so everyone around you they have limitations, let's put it that way. Whether they actually do or it's just a perception doesn't matter. The support is in the one person. And while I'm not going to necessarily complain about, well, I'm not going to say she needs to work herself to death. I'm not going to do that. I don't want her to do that. But the flip side is this is why Biden was too old. Now, I don't think Kamala is physically that as bad off as Biden, right? But I don't know what her health is. I just hope that it's not the case that she has to pull up this much because of her health, because it limits the ability of the government to function, because at the end of the day, the government, it's built around the Prime Minister. It does not work as constructed without her. So when she leaves, when she delegates too much of the public-facing role, you could delegate the work, you could delegate the grunt work. When you delegate too much of the public-facing, public-speaking role to other people, when it's not built around them, there's a reason why it doesn't end up looking good. Speaking about public-speaking roles, and this one kind of shocked me, at least to some extent. I have gone on your record giving my appreciation for the public relations skills of Dr. Kirk Mayhew, the public relations officer of the UNC. He has made statements with regards to the history of Trinidad and Tobago that has gotten significant pushback. And I'll say this, my praise for him technically, yes, does not align with this scenario, because I would argue this is a very, very, very bad public relations mistake. Now, I'm not necessarily 100% convinced it was a mistake of his own doing. I'm not saying it's not, though. I can't say that, given what I know of the individual, there's no way he would have done this. I can't say that. I can't say that. But I can see a scenario where he did what he was told. We just wouldn't necessarily know if that is the case, who told him. But like I said, I can't say that he couldn't have done this on his own either. Well, I will say this, he seems to be on a bit of a shorter leash ever since about half a year to a year before the election, right? So I don't know to what extent he has the same degree of independence that he would have had maybe a year ago. He hasn't necessarily taken any interview requests anymore. And if that version of events is true, where he's basically saying what people want him to say, then this would be evidence that not only was that a mistake that I would have said based on, the last year, how things were going, but this would compound that. But like I said, I don't know, because I believe it was on his social media, stating that Dr. Eric Williams was not the first prime minister of the country. And the reason why it's a public relations faux pas isn't, you don't even have to necessarily go with regards to if it's right or wrong, if it's accurate or inaccurate, if it's true or false. But rather, the reason why it's a public relations faux pas is because the whole narrative of the UNC being against Dr. Eric Williams and the whole wanting to discredit independence and the PNM's role in independence, that is a narrative, right? To what extent can we prove that to be true when there's like text messaging and money changed hands and documentation, right? But it's a narrative that some people have concluded or hypothesized based on certain observations, right? Some of it is speculation, some of it is observation and then assumption based on the observation. And before you think I'm disparaging those people, what I do is assumption based on observation, right? So there's this narrative out there that is being used to paint the UNC in a negative light. And this statement kind of feeds into that narrative in the wrong way. It kind of gives ammunition to people that want to push that narrative. I don't actually want to push that narrative. I never really spoke about it before. But given what happened, right, with regards to Dr. Mayhew's social media posts on Dr. Eric Williams not being the father of the nation. Listen, I get it. You know what? I am not here to say if that statement is true or false. Because half the time, or more often than not, the historical narrative of a person is not an accurate representation of the visionary events. It is rather just history that was written by the victors, for lack of a better way to put it. But that also doesn't mean that everything in history is false. And a lot of times when you look back on things like this and you want to have these debates, at best what you're going to get is you're going to turn it into a debate over subjectivity. You're not going to get a definitive conclusion. You're not going to reverse the narrative in a definitive way. So that the book on Dr. Eric Williams is he's the father of the nation. To some extent, that has been the accepted narrative of Dr. Eric Williams to the point where it is ingrained in our society. And the fact of the matter is, anybody now in 2025 that wants to compete or give a competing theory to that narrative, they themselves can't necessarily give any, so I suspect, or usually this is the case when you want to come in hindsight, to what extent could you actually offer proper evidence to prove your counterclaim? So at best you have a working theory, and it might not be a completely unreasonable theory. That doesn't mean it's true though, right? An unreasonable theory, a theory doesn't need to be true to be reasonable, because you're stuck in a place where you can't prove it to be true or untrue. So you just have this theory where the logic is technically, potentially, at least in some perspective, sound. Doesn't make it accurate or right. But to me, I didn't see the value of fighting it down. You're not going to change the narrative. Like I said, at best you will obfuscate it. But at the end of the day, doing so will play into criticisms of the UNC. And why would you want to walk into that head first? I have no idea. I really don't. So generally speaking, I have no issue with anyone that wants to criticize Dr. Mayhew's statements. I have not seen them. I have not seen the actual original post. So I don't necessarily want to say what my take is. I don't really have a take. I think this whole situation is unnecessary, to be honest. But it seems as though, unless he was instructed to do so, which I can't say that he was, I can't confidently say that he was, I'm just saying that for the sake of giving the alternative. I am willing to acknowledge that the potential exists. I doubt he would acknowledge it if that is the case. But regardless, the statements imply that there's somebody there in the UNC that has an axe to grind on the narrative. And at the end of the day, that is not a fight that you should try because you're not going to win. Dr. Eric Williams was there. He was the first guy. This is not rocket science at the end of the day. And I believe as one analyst, it could have been Dr. Mohammed, pointed out, what is with this argument of semantics? And also, as it was pointed to, what does this have to do about governing a country now? So this is a very weird strategy to take, one that I would not have expected Dr. Mayhew to undertake, and I'm left confused. The only reason why I wouldn't say I'm outright disappointed is, it's, to me, from my perspective, it is so weird. I don't want to just immediately just assume, oh, well, yeah, it is what it looks like, because it's just so strange to me that someone with his background, position, and ability would make this choice, which is so blatantly a bad choice. Academically, you're not going to win. In the court of public opinion, you're not going to win. And then on a practical level, it's meaningless. It's not going to change the price of bread. It's not going to mitigate flooding. It's not going to solve crime. So I don't get it. And for that reason, I really don't like it. All right, let's take a comment. Sir Grantley Adams was never in charge of Trinidad and Tobago. Specifically, he was the Prime Minister of the West Indies Federation, which included TNT as one of its 10 member territories. But his authority was federal, not territorial. I mean, yeah, that's another good thing to say. One of the interesting things with regards to systems of government that we need to understand, it's not as though there's one way to do it and this term only means this. And no, when he says federal, and ironically, I don't say that to disagree with the statement. It's actually meant to agree with the statement, because he's just using the term federal as a general, for lack of a better term. I don't know if, well, I guess federation, so federal might have been the formal term. But it is similar in the relationship of the American federal government, I believe, to the states. But notice that relationship is not exactly the same, because this is a federation of countries as opposed to any states, which is one country that is a federation of states who are like many countries but not, right? Trinidad and Tobago retained its own internal government during that time. The local leadership was headed by Dr. Eric Williams, who became chief minister in 1956 and later led the country to independence in 1962. Like, yeah, there's enough formality in his role as leader where, what are we arguing about? And that's the thing, like, are you trying to say Sir Grant? Because I believe he tried to say this is what is confusing, because it's confusing to me because it seems so unnecessary. Sorry, it was Professor Claudius Fergus that said you could twist this thing around in semantics and all kind of stuff. Yeah, Dr. Williams was the first Prime Minister of an independent TNT. That's the thing. I'm not entirely sure what Dr. Mayhew's argument was trying to be. Because even if during the Federation he was technically not Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, who was the first Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago? So, I don't know if perhaps he had a mentor about the Federation of the West Indies that had a certain idea about the Federation of the West Indies, which is not necessarily a common held idea by most people. But let me leave that there, because I've been going on about this for too long. Just a couple other things with regards to independence that I wanted to speak about. The Prime Minister was a no-show to one of the activities on the day of prayer. And like the organizer, I don't have an issue with it. The IRO had it at the Diwali Nagar side. I don't have an issue with it. Why? Because we're in a state of emergency and government ministers are supposed to have threats against their persons, so they cancel a very public event. So the last thing you want to do now is then go to a public event and say, hey, but look at me, I'm at this public event. That's number one. Number two, for senior government ministers like a prime minister or the AG or somebody to go to events like this, security concerns, it could be a disruption to the event, right? Or it'll add an additional burden. Now it's during a state of emergency when apparently there are threats against certain people in the government. That burden increases. So I understand, and I can appreciate, at least from my perspective, there are reasons why cabinet ministers shouldn't go to public events right now. You know, you're putting extra stress on the organizers of the events, and you are not only potentially exposing yourself to danger, but putting whoever else is at the event, you're exposing them to danger, because if anything goes on and it gets out of hand and escalates, then the members of the public present could be at risk. That's what I wanted to say yesterday when I first read that story. Then a member of the PNM, Simon de Nobrega, questioned government officials, including Minister Khadija Amin, one of the ministers listed as being threatened, and Barry Padarat, and Wayne Sturge, two other ministers listed of having death threats, particularly Minister Sturge. They had a whole scenario of an example, right, which I am not yet ready to say was not true, but this does not help that debate. They managed to attend a CPL match at the Brian Lara Stadium, and a situation which not only puts you out exposed to the public and potentially puts a lot of the public at that event in danger if anything happens, but just the traffic alone would make security concerns a nightmare. And MP de Nobrega had a good point. So they canceled the public events. Now, granted, canceling the Independence Day parade in part was to do with the parade and the amount of national security personnel that would have been pulled out. But arguably, part of the justification, at least they didn't say that it wasn't, they didn't say that it wasn't, was the security risks, right, to the cabinet. And then you go and do a public appearance. A very public appearance. One could argue the crowd here would have been bigger, and the security here would have technically been less than or not as significant as the Independence Day parade. And they're fine doing this. This immediately discredits the claims that there are threats against the lives of cabinet ministers, because I don't know how to try to explain it in technical terms when it's low-hanging fruit obvious. There's a threat against my life. We can't appear in public. Same day as the cancelled event, go to a cricket match. This is a very, very, very bad luck, because the Prime Minister, she couldn't actually defend the situation. She had to deflect. The PNM should concentrate on getting corporations that come for the money they shamelessly wasted on fetting and rum drinking. We under a state of emergency. Minister Sturge apparently had a car following him. It caused the security team to be concerned for his safety. They had to whisk him away to a police station. All of these are reported in the media. But he'll just show up to a CPL game. We jamming still. Think about it. Either the threat is not as bad as they're selling us. That's what their actions are undermining their own national security narrative. Their actions are undermining their own justification for the state of emergency. Or They're just that irresponsible. Oh no, we have a threat against our life, but we're going to go out in public to wade amongst the people, right? Because we're jamming still, we're Trinis. And as the leaders of the country now, we need to express the complete and utter ridiculousness of our cultural situation. The gangs could threaten my life, we jamming still. The bullets could fly by, we jamming still. The public could be in danger, we jamming still. Because obviously you're not taking the threats against your life seriously. Obviously. Obviously. It ain't that serious. And here I was wanting to say, look, let's not disbelieve what they have to say. And I still believe they're threats against your life. It's just that now, I can't say that it's a serious threat against their life, 100%, with a straight face, and not some amount of irony laced in, not some amount of sarcasm sprinkled in, because of what they did. And again, it does not help where we want the Prime Minister to lead. But in this situation, what is she doing? She's running cover for her cabinet ministers, which I understand on base level, that is natural, but you can't even speak Minister Parat said law enforcement officials recommended whether or not to attend events. Really? Some of these crowds are going to be bigger than what... Like, I understand. Here's the thing, right? Even if practically law enforcement says it's safe, where is your chief of staff or your political advisor to tell you it doesn't matter if it's practically safe, you going to public events, certain large-scale public events, certain recreational public events during a state of emergency after you claim that there are threats against your life is a bad look politically. And if, Minister Parat, you don't understand that, then I'm just going to outright say you're not qualified for your job. No political advice, at least historically. I don't know right now. In 2025, there might be a lot of yahoos in the White House, in the British Parliament, in the Canadian cabinet. There might be a lot of yahoos all over the place. But no advisor worth his salt would say, oh no, yeah, it's fine. You go and party. You go to the cricket match and be with the people. Yeah, we cancel independence, you know, because of security concerns. But that's okay. You go and, you know, you go and shake hands and meet the people and expose yourself to the public and have a good time and let them see that you're having a good time. Ironically, so what you're saying is the opposition leader told you to do something and you did it. That's what you're saying. Because the opposition leader said you need to prove that you are not afraid of the gangs. And I guess they were like, yes, ma'am. You know, we'll obey your instruction. I don't understand how people could like be in government and they don't see that if we talk about national security here, then we kind of have to account for that over here. It's ridiculous. Because when you do that, when there is things like that disconnect, where like I don't see the need to account for the fact that there's threats against my life when I'm considering if I should go to a cricket match or not. I don't see the need at all. When you have disconnects like that in a narrative, it implies that the narrative is not true. So you're undermining yourself. And now you've given all of your critics all the ammunition that you want, and I can't blame them if that's the case. This is a ridiculous situation. Again, and I'll go back to the point that I pulled up on halfway. The Prime Minister redirected to the expenditure of P&M corporations, right? Listen, that could be a legitimate issue, but you actually undermined any argument you want with the P&M corporations because you're trying to use it as a deflection. So already that for me at least, and for some people, it would make us seem, oh, that's a throwaway statement. That's not a serious issue because you're not treating it seriously. That's point number one. Point number two, you're not addressing the contradiction of priorities here. And if you don't understand that, what I said about Minister Padra technically would apply. But I have a hard time thinking that you don't understand that, which means you're just trying to do damage control. But we're only 5 months in, and the damage control start. Now, granted, I think for the PNM, they already had controversies by month 6 at the latest. So, again, we're supposed to be better than. All right, let us take that break that I was supposed to take. And when we come back, we will speak about what happened yesterday when it rained fire. Stay tuned.
Welcome to ASTI, Advanced Solutions Technical Institute. We offer hands-on training in drone technology, fiber optics, hybrid, security, business support, and more. Our programs are built to equip you with real-world skills for today's evolving industries. Get certified, get hired, and take your career to the next level with ASTI. Call 778-2135 or email info@astitnt.com. ASTI, where learning meets opportunity.
KDM Health Limited says, test yourself for STDs in the privacy of your own home. Our self-help test kits for all STDs are available at our wholesale office in Chaguanas. Call 283-1423, visit our website at www.kdmhealtht.com or email us at kdmhealthlimited@gmail.com to place your orders. Available at all health institutions and pharmacies. Contact us for a free list of products and prices.
I am Dr. Delphina Ovid, your friendly neighborhood dentist. At Community Hospital Dental Clinic, we offer examinations which include x-rays, basic oral cancer screening, and a treatment plan. We also offer cleanings, fillings, extractions, root canal treatment, and complete and partial dentures. Remember, you don't have to brush and floss all your teeth, just the ones you want to keep.
Give us a call at 235-5479.
The Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
If these walls could talk, they'd cry uncle. They didn't plan to become offices or yoga studios, but they've stood by us, even when we got a little stir-crazy. For that, they deserve some thanks. They deserve Benjamin Moore.
Struggling with heart health or frequent migraines? Discover the simple steps to reclaim your energy and vitality.
We're diving into a topic that affects about 422 million people around the world: diabetes.
Tune into Wellness Unlocked, the series that delivers expert advice, practical tips, and inspiring stories to help you take control of your health and well-being. Your health matters. Don't miss Wellness Unlocked. Watch now on WESN and take the first step toward better health.
All right, yesterday, something that was to some extent unprecedented happened. I believe at least one CNN commentator said it was an escalation against gangs, which I found interesting that CNN was going to give us such a neutral statement. But essentially, what looked like a high-powered speedboat was hit by an airstrike, and it essentially took out the occupants and whatever was in the boat. It's not necessarily a big boat, as you see. This is the release footage. I got it from the I believe it was the White House social media Facebook page, but it was a White House Facebook post of Donald Trump's, I think it was his X post, right? So this situation, and now the Americans claim there were 11 people on the boat, and it was smuggling drugs. You could kind of tell there are parcels on the boat. It's difficult to say how many people with just what was given to us, to the public, was on the boat. But most likely, they would have been observing the boat for a significant amount of time. There would be lawyers on the American ships, legal officers, to kind of say if it's okay to hit the boat or not. You know, it was in international waters, depending on anti-terrorism laws, and we've already spoken here on Talking Point that, yes, the local criminal enterprise, if they are threatening the government because of actions the government are taking, that is more or less coming to the point of terrorism, right, on a very basic level. So this is where now the legality is a bit blurred. It's on international waters. This boat seemingly is up to no good, and they did something that was unprecedented, probably a drone strike. One of the things is this image is, I assume it's degraded a bit, and everything that's blurred, that would have been the information from the platform that took this video that is still classified. They don't want to reveal that to us, right? So maybe there was a lot more video and a lot more detailed information from the footage that could have identified further what was going on. Regardless, they claim there was in international waters. This is one of those things where I'm a little bit nervous about, because this is one part of the world where there's not a lot of eyes. And by eyes, I mean radars that could track everything that's going on, right? I believe we have a radar, but I don't know, we don't know for sure where this was. They say international waters, where in international waters. I didn't necessarily find any statement to claim where. I believe it might have been either the Secretary of State or the Vice President that said it was on its way to either Trinidad or some other island in the Caribbean. So I assume it's coming from the west, and it's not coming from a point between Venezuela and Trinidad in our immediate border, and I don't think it reached us yet, right? One of the things is what might make the strike legal and why it being in international waters is true is, well, if it's in international waters, they're not stepping on the sovereignty of any state. If they did this in our waters, then that would be a different situation, a bigger deal than doing it on international waters, where this is the thing, right? It's not like anybody wants to claim this boat. I believe the Venezuelan government is saying this is an AI fake video. The problem with that is, usually with a society like America, it's very hard to keep certain conspiracies secret for long. Somebody will leak it. Just look at, people that spoke out about Guantanamo Bay, WikiLeaks, etc., etc. So this most likely is not an AI shot. This is the first step. Now the question is, this and all, how will this impact smuggling between Trinidad and Venezuela to Trinidad, right? Like, some people might think, oh, these guys are dumb, the American Navy is here, why are you going to try this? Well, again, this is unprecedented. No one is expecting a military asset to shoot a missile that might be worth more than the drugs in the boat, depending on what they used, right? To hit a pirogue, that would be overkill. But no, it seems like the Americans are serious. And now the question is, will smugglers continue to test? And more importantly, what about the people who want to smuggle people or food or whatever? Now is not the time to try to illegally cross between Trinidad and Tobago. Now is not the time, if you're Venezuelan, if you want to say, I need to get out of here and I'm going to go to Trinidad. Now is not that time. what I'm hoping is, even though it might not have been in our waters, what I'm hoping is this might start to impact the smugglers in general, whether they're drugs or not. Now, granted, they could probably tell if it's a drug boat or if it's just people looking to illegally cross into Trinidad, human trafficking, or just human smuggling. But people that might maybe trying to take food across, you know, packages wrapped up in garbage bags, or whatever you use it to wrap it up, because you're not just going to have vegetables in a crate, right, in the open ocean. Yeah, that's probably a good way to make yourself look like a target. Because I doubt there was an American human intelligence asset that tracked this boat. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they did. Maybe they did have a human intelligence asset in Venezuela that said, this so-and-so boat launched at so-and-so time. That's a target. Now, like I said, one of the things that makes me nervous is if this was like the Baltic Sea, certain parts of Eastern Europe, certain parts of Southeast Asia, the Southeast Asian coast, like by Taiwan, Japan, around South Korea, South China Sea, etc., you'll have multiple countries with their radars looking at everything. This is the north coast of Venezuela. I don't even know if Venezuela has radar capabilities. If Trinidad has radar capabilities, maybe we could track the American ships, but to track this pirogue where it was, we don't know for sure, right? It's over the horizon, a pirogue, low to the water, small, any clutter of the waves. I don't know if our radar has the kind of power to track something at a distance if it's not close to us. This is why you have radars on planes, for that look down over the horizon ability. So the Americans, they could see more or less everything that's going on almost. But I don't think there's much assets from the rest of the world, which means they could control the narrative. And that's something that you have to keep at the back of your mind. As much as I'm willing to accept this to be 100% true, because there's much benefit to lie if it's this once. If the situation continues, you know, the benefits of having a false narrative do actually start to go within your realm of practicality. That's very speculative. But I still feel that I have the need to point out the fact that, at least for now, they could say whatever happens, happens, and at least half of the picture, the rest of the world is not really going to know. And like I said, Venezuela doesn't want to claim this boat as theirs. They have gone to the point where the Minister of Defense, the Venezuelan Minister of Defense, if we could, he has gone on to the point where General Vladimir Padrino Lopez, Venezuela's defense minister, and it's a hell of a thing when you have a 4-star general, an active duty general, as you're in the civilian oversight role of your military. He is claiming that there are Trinidadian mafias destabilizing Venezuela through human trafficking and other illegal activities. Where's the problem? Where our mafias apparently are a much bigger problem in Venezuela. I did not know this. This is news, right? Or maybe this is deflection, or they're accusing us of this, well, we'll accuse them of the same thing back. I don't think anybody is thinking, oh no, yes, all of our Trinidadian gangs that's going to Venezuela to conduct crime over there, you know? It's not as though the killing is down in Venezuela and violent crime is down in Venezuela. It is. Based on reports of people that I've heard from people on the ground there, violent crime is down on the streets of Venezuela. Violent crime is up here. So I wonder where the gangs are and where the crime is happening. I see we have a comment coming in. Let's take this comment. This is an interesting comment. Why was the boat blown up given the military might of the US in the area? Well, here's the thing. As much as there are 3 ARG vessels, one helicopter carrier, dock, 2 amphibious assault vessels. So there's 3 ARG vessels, there's 1 submarine, there's 3 destroyers, I believe, and 1 cruiser. They're not necessarily going to automatically in position to intercept this boat. Now, arguably, you could say, well, send some Marines on a helicopter. I don't necessarily know what the speed of this boat was and if a Marine helicopter could catch up to it. I really just don't, right? one would think that they could, but as a go-fast boat, it's different to say like a 1-engine, 2-engine pirogue off of the Somalian coast. So why did they blow it up? I think it could have been a situation where they prefer to blow it up than let it reach into another state's sovereign territory. And then it would have made it more complicated to intervene, right? Because I assume they were coming from west and going east. I don't know where in Venezuela they launched from. I just assume it's not the portions of the Venezuelan waters that are directly opposite to us and our territory. So I believe somewhere to the west they slipped into international waters. I don't know why, but that could be the case because America chose to act when they were in international waters. And they may not have necessarily been in a position to intercept, but that still doesn't put them, they might have been out of range of a physical interception to capture, but not necessarily out of range of an airstrike or a drone strike. It's, so, all right, more to say on this, but I just thought that was interesting that all of a sudden now there are Trinidadian mafias and Guyanese mafias that are operating in Venezuela. You know, yeah. All of those Guyanese and Trinidadian criminals operating in Venezuela, causing all of that crime in Venezuela, all of that violence. Oh wait, no, that's here. Oh, I'm sorry. We have a money line. We'll take the call. I'll continue the commentary, but we'll take the call. Arima, good morning.
Jamaica Small, good morning.
Morning.
Well, today's my last day to be calling you for a while because I'll be back out of duty from tomorrow. And I'm glad you mentioned the issue with the ministers of Dutch and the attending a cricket match. Yeah, I like that. Now, I have two bones to pick. The first one is with the Tinapuna Piaco Regional Corporation and the Port of Spain Mayor. Now, these gentlemen said private citizens donated money for the fireworks display. I would like to see some audited kind of statement, please, and I will tell you why. The statutory responsibilities that these gentlemen have, which they're not fulfilling. Because last night on the news, it was painful to listen to the workers in the Port of Spain City Corporation complain that most of the vehicles that they have are not being properly maintained. Therefore, they don't have it to work. But private citizens are donating money for you to have fireworks. Potholes and the roads, wrong by me, the bridge needs changing. When we asked the councillor, there are no funds. So we have to stick with this old Bailey Bridge until whenever money comes. But still only having money from private citizens to have a fireworks display for independence. You see, the other social responsibility is things like you're giving out books to children and you're giving out meals, food to people. I am in all of that. Tell me you take the money and you do that, but don't tell me you're taking private money from private citizens to have a fireworks display. That is one. The second one, I think we need one of these warships or frigates that the US have in the Gulf of Paria, especially in the Dragon's Mouth. If we have to curb the trafficking in narcotics, people, animals, and guns between Trinidad and Tobago and the mainland, we're supposed to have one of those frigates in our waters. Because it seems to me that the Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard isn't effective at doing that at all. However, it go the smugglers like the time in them. And you made a statement just now concerning Venezuela. I do believe Venezuela has a radar because Venezuela's maritime assets is about 100 times ours. They have fighter jets. All right? I saw that watching YouTube. And what I'm going to leave you with is a term the Chinese use. They call it gunboat diplomacy. Yeah, you can do a little research on that. Thank you. Good show as usual. I'm off there. Give other callers a chance.
Thanks, caller. The reason why I said I don't think that they could see, Venezuela probably has radar and they could track the US boats and US planes. It is to track a pirogue, depending on how far away it is from your radar, you know, because you have, the radar signals can't curve over the horizon. So a small boat, it's shorter, right? That's the main physical aspect that matters. It's shorter, it's not high out of the water. It could be lost in the clutter of the waves, right? Now, if you have a surface radar close to where the boat is, maybe from another boat, you might be able to track the pirogue. But if you have a ground-based radar on the coast, and it's probably not even going to be right on the coast, it's going to be somewhere inland, right? Not too far, but still. And this is something out in international waters. So that implies it's to some extent not right on your coastline in your waters. That's where I doubt. When it comes to tracking pirogues, I don't know what we will miss. What people outside of the Americans will probably not be able to track is the exact location where these pirogues, what direction are they going in, what speed are they going in. I don't think Trinidad or Venezuela is necessarily well equipped to track them. If it was an oil tanker, if it was a big yacht, you know, if it was a cargo vessel, yeah, that's different. We could probably track that. Large commercial shipping, we could probably track that. But a small pirogue, I don't know if the radar could track that if it's far out in international waters. And I think that applies to Trinidad and Venezuela and anybody else. I don't think there's anybody else. So in cases like that, in small scale encounters like that, to some extent, they're the only ones that have any information, because they have the Poseidon aircraft, to some extent, I believe, would have some capacity to search. And the American ships would be in closer proximity. So their surface radars, which might, depending, advancements in radars are a hell of a thing. I doubt the Venezuelans or us, we have ASA radars, electronically scanned arrays, et cetera, et cetera. But they would potentially be closer to the target. So even if they're relying on surface radars, they should be able to track. And then, you know, whatever sensors they have in their drones, if they get any E2C Hawkeyes down there. I'm not sure if Poseidons have surface air-to-ground look-down radars on them, as much as their surveillance planes. But they would also have, to some extent, maritime sensors. Sonars are probably not necessarily effective to try and track a pirogue. It's one of those weird things where the scale of the target, technically speaking, the Navy is not optimized to deal with it. So I do have questions myself, but that's just technical things that I'm curious about. Let's take this comment before the call. What's up with Karen today? I'll just say this. She wasn't available today. She's fine. There's nothing wrong with Karen, but she wasn't available for the show today. Hopefully she'll be on next week. We have Claxton on the line. Karen, but she wasn't available for the show today. Hopefully she'll be on next week. Claxton Bay, good morning. You on here?
Yeah. Hi. Morning, Sean.
Morning.
Yeah. Sean, you ever thought about America is so tricky? You ever thought about that situation could be must be an AI prank or some kind of thing? They could set up that. They could have a small boat and let it out there and make you believe, and then, you know, we shoot down something. You understand? Because America will do anything to make you believe, you know, that is because if a lot of people believe in America. They feel like nothing can happen to America. America is so invincible. And don't talk about for right in Trinidad here. There's a lot of people believe in America that they could do anything. You understand? But we live in a different time. This is not 1903. You understand? This is the new jet age where the whole world is watching and seeing. And only propaganda and misinformation, just like how they're saying Maduro dealing with drugs and this and that. It's not Maduro alone. Right in the country, all the drugs were coming here in containers and guns. Who collecting that? Up to this day, We never hear the people who collecting that. You can't tell us who these all the warehouses and different things, these drugs going on, who they're going to, who collecting it. You understand? I would like to see the same Prime Minister take some of the American soldiers and bring them here to deal with the people who collecting the drugs, because we could never know. Only investigation taking place in this country. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. I'll just say this, I'll reiterate the point. Faking the video, the benefits aren't really, it doesn't make sense. There's already going to be some amount of negative backlash to doing a strike. So if you fake it, you're not actually removing drugs, but you have to deal with the negative consequences, right? And then to the smugglers, they could be like, did we lose a boat? No, we didn't lose a boat. Oh, well, let's just continue to smuggle and see what happens. The drug lords don't care about losing this one boat. What they care about is the implications that America may actually attack them. And that might cause a change of behavior. But if America fakes it, they're gonna see through that. Meanwhile, the rest of the world, they're probably going to get hit with more negative criticism from the international community than positive for this action. So why fake it? Why fake it if you don't have a corresponding actual result? It doesn't make sense to me. If they fake a series of events, then you could argue they're trying to craft a narrative for a purpose. But faking one event, the benefits don't outweigh the negatives or even justify the effort. To me, that's my opinion. That's why I don't think it's fake. We have San Fernando on the line. Good morning, caller, on the air.
Good morning, Sean.
Morning.
You know, I have been listening to you on this issue, this Venezuelan issue, this U.S. issue. Well, you've been on it for several times for the last couple of weeks. You know, and you go ahead as if you are a military analyst with a lot of inaccurate information and a lot of suppositions that you make.
There's a lot of suppositions, yes.
A lot of suppositions. No. Let me say this. No. You're talking about this issue with this video that the U.S. government put out on this boat that they destroyed. Now, there are boats that leave Venezuela going to the Dominican Republic. Similar type of boats that leave Venezuela going straight to the Dominican Republic, carrying cargo. There are a lot of what you call informal trade in terms of they're not using actual ships. Mm-hmm. They use pirogues. There are boats like that that come to Trinidad doing legitimate trade. Legitimate trade. They come and they park up on the port in Port of Spain, at the wharf. They come to San Fernando. They bring up stuff, customs in San Fernando, and the wharf there is a customs center. They have a little thing by a little booth there, but they come there and they come by customs and do legitimate business with those same type of boats. And you want to believe, because America said that was a smuggling boat, that is so.
Would they, caller, I understand with those same type of hulls, but have you ever seen a legitimate trader have 4 outboards that size?
Yes, Sean. Yes. Yes. The boat, the pirogues that do trade within the region are larger than normal pirogues, and they have more engines. Some of them have 3, some of them have 4, some of them even have 5 engines. Even 5 engines that do trade. This trade, this informal trade issue that we have with Venezuela has been going on for many years, you know, Sean. They used to come to Chagaramas and buy, and they bring up stuff from Venezuela, and then they buy stuff and take back down. What I know has been going on for over 30 years when I was involved in it. There are smuggling boats, yes, that go from Maracaibo area straight across to Trinidad. That issue you also talked about with the Venezuelan military general there talked about Trinidad. Trinidadians been doing smuggling trade with Venezuela, not now.
Yes.
This human trafficking didn't start now in Venezuela. illegal trading starting now with Venezuela, with Trinidadians going down there with the boats and doing the trade. This is a big established business for decades. So to come on the television and you trying to push a narrative where because the USA is wrong.
But caller,
because all they're doing is speculating.
But caller, I did make the point that to some extent, no one could corroborate where this boat was, what this boat was doing.
And that is
yes,
the point.
but my point is,
my
point, caller, is I made that point. So you can't say that I am pushing a narrative when I made that point.
You obviously not listening to what you're saying and need to go back and watch your programs, eh? You need to go back and watch some of your programs, you know.
Well, hold on. What you're talking about now doesn't have anything to do with the previous commentary, because I didn't speak about anything to do with the boats on the water before, right? I even before acknowledged the fact that yes, there is.
I am not speaking specifically about this.
But you said right, and what I'm saying, and what I'm saying is, with
a lot of supposition.
But what I'm saying is, your analysis of my suppositions is not accurate, because I did not speak about what boats were doing what on the water. I even acknowledged the fact. I even acknowledged the fact last week. That the Americans' purpose might not be to do anything with drug smuggling. It could be regime change. I even said that more than once last week.
I am not speaking about it. I am speaking specifically about this issue that you're covering.
But you are only talking about statements today.
You're pushing a narrative.
So what is the example of the narrative from last week?
Do you know what radars they have in Venezuela? Do you know?
Do you know?
You don't.
Okay, right. But hold on. What specific example from last week? And if I'm wrong about the radars, fine, I'm wrong. But ironically, look at my point. My point about the radars was to try to say why I think the Americans can get away with not telling us the truth. So are you agreeing with that or disagreeing with that? Because if you're disagreeing with the point on radars, then what you're saying is
you don't know if Venezuela have any radars.
It's not about having radars, caller. It is how radars work.
Listen to me.
It is how surface radars work.
No idea. There's one video that the American government put out, and you go on a whole narrative that you have no idea. They said what position it was. They give the longitude and the latitude when they blow up the boat.
And I acknowledge that. I acknowledge that, caller. I acknowledge that.
And then to say, if it is that was a legitimate boat going and do trade, they have just murdered 13 or 10 people.
I didn't finish. I got a call. I didn't finish. I haven't reached all of my points yet.
I am saying this because all of that could have been put in all that narrative that you went about.
Hold on. Stop. Cut the call. I'm getting frustrated now. You have not said anything about what I said last week. You're only referencing this week. And I have just said I didn't get a chance to get to anything. How am I supposed to craft a narrative? How? You're going off. You're going off because you have your own conclusions. I get that. But don't put words in my mouth. Don't put words in my mouth. I have acknowledged the fact that the Americans might be here more than just to deal with the drugs. I have put out what I think is a reasonable analysis of how the Americans can get away with lying. So you want to say, oh, I have a narrative to support the Americans, but what my fears about how the Americans are lying might be false. Pick which one you want to disagree with me about. You can't disagree with me on both sides of the argument. The thing about boats and smuggling, I only spoke about today. Don't bring up last week. Don't bring up last week. Because then you're trying to generalize what I'm saying. What I said about radars are generally how radars work. That's just how it is. If they have radars with better capabilities, that's fine. But then that means that we could track and see everything that they do, that Venezuela could track and see everything that they do, and that somebody else potentially could track and see whatever they do. Which kind of puts the narrative of, because when you could track it, then you could see where it launched from. You could have more information and more speculation and potentially more evidence on what its purpose was. Did it launch from a port where normally you have informal traders launching from, or did it launch from an illegal port? But I didn't have time to get into all of that before you decided to come here and quarrel with me about it. Because you didn't like what I said last week, but what I said last week, you did not speak to at all directly. And instead of acknowledging that, you want to double down. All right, fine, it is what it is. Be specific. Radars work a certain way. It doesn't matter how much magic it is. There are certain limitations to technology. If you read up enough about it, you know. You know certain things, I don't question you about what you know. Don't come and question me with regards to what I know. Are you mean to tell me that there's Trinidadian criminals operating in Venezuela? There's transnational Trinidadian criminals operating in Venezuela? Yes, I get it. There are Trinidadian criminals that are part of the smuggling. That's not the same thing. We are not running the show in Venezuelan crime. That is the implication of what he said. And again, I didn't have time to get anywhere. The calls came in early. I took the calls. Maybe I should have taken the calls early then. Yes, it could have been innocent people. I haven't reached the point where I'm questioning, did they have any human intelligence? Did they track the boat from its location? Although I didn't mention that though. I didn't get to that point because you didn't give me a chance. It's not that I felt that I was attacked. It's that I felt I was attacked unfairly. And more importantly, it felt that I was misrepresented. Because you're using what I said today and you're applying it retroactively for the rest of the week. I didn't speak about certain things before. I didn't. Diego Martin on the line.
Good morning, Sean. I am not going to add fuel to the fire. I'm going to walk with my coal pot. Let me say my two pieces. A radar is as good as the personnel who is operating it, just like an X-ray. You could take an X-ray, but if the person who is using the X-ray is not familiar with the nitty-gritty, it comes to naught. Now let me talk about the blowing up of that boat that the Americans say was a narcotic boat. Who are we to say the Americans' narrative is wrong? Let us go back to the evidence. Every time a big drug bust is made in Trinidad, you hear the narrative. With the help of the DAE and this one and the ATF, they have locked it down, and our local police take it from there, and they congratulate. So what that tells us? That tells us there's a deep hole in our intelligence gathering. And I don't believe we have enough, how should I say, competence to throw another narrative outside the Americans until our fraternity, security fraternity, can tell us, hey, that. Because let's face it, all of those big drug busts, what happens with it? Yes, it takes so long and get prosecution. They only get prosecuted and sentenced when they go back and extradited to America. So we have an issue with gathering effective and efficient intelligence. And I'm not going to say it because I suspect we deliberately, the hierarchy and the high office holder, deliberately. And I'm going back to the OPV. You remember the OPV was to fight crime, right? And I am putting the narrative that that was a fallacy. And I'm putting the narrative that it was to get back at 10%. I'm going down hard now. And why I'm saying that? How can you procure a vessel that BAE couldn't deliver? Tell me how. You give them a specification for 2 gunboats and things, and they couldn't build it just to that. So that tells me hey, something was wrong with that procurement and there was a hidden agenda. I'm going to juxtapose that with the World GTL plant, another guinea pig. You procure something that never really functioned anyway. So that's two procurements. And the third one, to crystallize it, we never wanted to pass the procurement legislation as it is in 2015. And there is a hidden agenda for that, and I say no more. All I am seeing here now, and I'm happy that I'm seeing it, it is another variant of the ship rider agreement. Somebody, the Americans, our Uncle Sam, is protecting our border, and we could get our local domestic police government company to do the inside work. The perimeter of the country would be protected to some extent. No, this is the time to take down Mr. Big. We have always said Mr. Manning knows Mr. Big. The former finance minister says she has a sense what Mr. Manning was talking about. Now is the time to go after him. If Mr. Big is the man who leading all these problems with narcotic, this is the time. And the present Prime Minister, she's very strong and she has a lot of people and saying very, very strong words. And I believe she take down a lot of hardback men, Pandey, Manning, Rowley, Young, all of them. And I believe she could be mano mano, and I hope we are going after Mr. Big. I'm going to have a nice morning.
I don't know if this current situation has changed the circumstances about any local Mr. Bigs. Unless the local Mr. Bigs are the transnational Mr. Bigs. But given most of what we know about how crime works in this country, it's not 100% guaranteed to be accurate. Our local big shots are not the regional or international big shots, given what we know, right? So maybe they are, but I'm not willing to speculate on that. The thing is, to some extent, I don't even know to what degree it's going to impact our internal situation, right? So, and as much as Clarkson Bay said he wants American troops here to deal with it, that's not so easy. That has a lot of worms with regards to just to have the law to allow for that. Because that's not even a foreign police agent or law enforcement agent. Now we're talking about foreign military personnel. That, and again, it goes back to, they dealt with it in international waters. It could have been because it's simpler to deal with it there. Now, with regards to confirming that it's a drug boat now that we have reached this point in the conversation. And it goes back to why I was trying to say what I say about radars. Again, America has P-8 planes. I don't know where the P-8s are launching from, if they're taken off from a base in Panama. Or I haven't looked into that, right? But look-down radars are important in order to track surface targets, particularly smaller surface targets. I don't know if anybody else has that ability. But just because you can track a thing doesn't mean you could confirm what it is. This is the thing. You have friendly fire incidents on battlefields. It happens. You lose track of things on battlefields. It happens. Right? That's probably not the only boat on the water. I don't know if it was the only pirogue on the water at the time, if it was the only pirogue of the water at the time in that area, if there were multiple pirogues, or if it literally was, maybe all of, because as was pointed out off air before, during the break, maybe a lot of the people with their private boats said, let me not do this run, because Americans out there, they might mistake me for smugglers. We don't know. There's always a chance that it was innocents on the boat. And I don't even know if you could necessarily go to the wreckage, because I don't know if the boat subsequently sank. I assume it did. It's a pirogue, and it got hit with something that had a high explosive wood on it. So I would assume it sank. If it was in international waters, it would be deep waters. If it wasn't in international waters, then it would be different. There's a chance that it would be shallow enough to recover. And then if there was drugs, I don't know if you could recover the drugs to say definitively that's what was being smuggled. You could, but if it was something else on the boat, you might get traces of what the something else was. Would you have enough to give a definitive statement? This could also be why they hit it in international waters. You avoid certain things and certain questions, right? I would hope But I don't know for sure. I would hope that they would have put a lot more work with regards to identifying the targets. Because this is not like the global war on terror where there's a lot more gray area when you're in Afghanistan and Iraq and stuff like that and stuff like that. And they had lawyers for those drone strikes for that. This is an unprecedented situation. So if you make a mistake here, it might come out later down the line. That doesn't make you immune from prosecution later down the line. That's why faking this, I mean, I guess faking this, you can't be prosecuted if it was a fake video because no crime actually happened. But the perception around it, the negative perception, will exist. This is an unprecedented situation. This is an unprecedented use of force. So, and what that means is, not only could you be potentially legal, but even the legal framework and limits, no one really knows what that would be. Because the whole terrorism thing, you know, the literal, by literal definition on a basic level, yes, which is what I said earlier. But to say that this is something that you have a concrete, you know, I have a court precedent that says that everything is on the up and up, maybe there might be some indirect application of some old precedent or some old law. You know, Trump has dug up an old law in the past with one of these things, right? How well that will hold up, that's a whole other kettle of fish. And then international law is a whole other kettle of fish to actual local or national sovereign law, right? I didn't even get to there's a whole second half of the whole thing before Rima called, but anyway. So that possibility, that is not zero, that it was civilians. It's not. And this is one of those things where we probably will never know. Maybe we might get reports of whoever died or whatever, but that might not be accurate, depending. And I was trying to get to the point of, this is one of those times where people going out on the water now, and the obvious low-hanging fruit is other smugglers, other whatever, other whoever carrying whatever, who in theory won't be the target of the drug smuggler, of the United States Navy. They're not here to deal with someone smuggling toothpaste. But I couldn't get to those points because I didn't have the chance to. We have a call on the line.
Hello.
Morning, caller.
Morning, Sean. Diego Martin here.
Yeah.
Don't let San Fernando get you all riled up, man. You're better than that. The fact is that he is a passionate fellow himself, and he seems he has a wide knowledge of a lot of things. And but he's also what I've seen over the time I've been listening to him. He's very, he's very strong-minded. So you cannot take that and go on with that. He's a caller just like myself, and everybody appreciates their comments and so on. But what I have to say is that a Purov like that, as far as what I saw, there are 150 horsepower engines on each of them. So that means you have 600 horsepower engine here in all. They have a Purov like that, which I think is about 34 feet. A transom to hold that 4 engines has to be so thick. An ordinary Purov cannot have more than 2 150. If you notice the boats that go to the Great Race, most of them have 2. Or if they have 3, it will be like 75. But just to say, you must not drive on a boat. I can tell you that. You see that kind of engine they have there? Those 4, that's 600 horsepower. Nobody in the right mind going to put that in the back of the engine. So by the time you hit rough seas with that, and that transom has to shake, those engines could fall off of that transom. That transom has to be real thick and real solid to be able to withstand that. And I don't know what it is. I try to understand AI to start with. So I cannot say what it is. But what I could tell you is that the reason why I think the U.S. had to fire is because that the runners, the boats that they have, the runners, does not have the speed to catch that boat that they had here. because the runners will only have probably 50 horsepower or 75 horsepower, so we're never able to catch up with that Europe. And if they decide to go into sovereign territory, the U.S. couldn't go in there. So that is the next point for it. So whether it is AI, as I say, I don't know, but I don't think so. I don't think that I know the Americans have on that big carrier they have here. They have, barring the radars, they have some equipment that could see into a boat and see, even if it's in a hatch, a big ship, it could go down to the hatch and see what cargo they have and whatever it has. It's a spying equipment they have, and I am telling you, they would have known if it was drugs or just food stuff. So they have to be aware of all these things. So thank you for taking my call, and you take care, my friend, and have a good morning.
Thank you, caller. Like, there's a reason why dealing with the Somali pirates in pirogues was difficult. That military equipment like that is not meant to have to deal with pirogues. Now, I will agree with you. I wasn't necessarily going to say that Mr. Sanfana was right or wrong, because he is saying he saw the boats like that, right? And I have not seen it. Economically, it didn't make much sense to me that you're going to have 4 large engines, given the size of the engines on that pirogue. That seemed to be way out of scale of what a trader would carry. A smuggler would do it because you're smuggling high-value things, but the amount of gas to run those engines alone, and yes, just to have them on the frame of the boat is literally just taking up the whole rear end of the boat. That's not something you do on as a workhorse. You don't go for max speed, max power as a workhorse. You want economies of scale, economic use of fuel. So I wasn't necessarily, I was doubting what Mr. Sanfana said, but I wouldn't necessarily fully disagree with him. But your point about the engine size, I tried to make, he claimed that yes, they run engines that size. Doesn't seem practical to me. I'm not necessarily ready to dispute it, but I'm more in line with your thinking. That once you get to, I wouldn't doubt that they might have traders with 4 engines. More engines technically safe if you have a breakdown. But engines of that size, to put out, as you rightfully pointed out, the horsepower. Yes, launch craft from American ships probably can't catch that, but they have helicopters. So then the argument is now, I know in Somalia, they would intercept pirates with their launch craft, right? I'm not too sure, they might have to disable, it depends, because not all of the Somali pirates only use pirogue-like vessels with high-powered engines. Sometimes they use other boats, whether it's to tow or motherships to refuel or what have you. But I do remember seeing operations where they would use rubber launchers to board suspected pirate boats. But they didn't have to chase them down. They have helicopters that maybe could chase them down. This is where I will admit, I don't know if the Seahawks could keep up with a go-fast boat, depending on if the conditions allow it to have, its optimal max speed. If the seas are too rough, then potentially it would retract from the speed and make it easier to catch up. And then, more importantly, just because they can catch up doesn't mean they were in position to catch up. That's my speculation as to why they short-faced. The other potential motivation of why they short-faced is maybe that was their rules of engagement. Donald Trump is that aggressive. And again, this is unprecedented. So part of the complications of it being unprecedented is, what do you now accuse them of? Because on a very basic level, you can see a justification of the terrorism distinction. But you could potentially poke holes in that. It's just what angle? We don't know, because they have not been cases of either defending or prosecuting things like this, at least to my mind. Because even the Somali pirates, as much as it's military operations, their rules of engagement are more centered around law enforcement type rules. Whereas this situation seems to be more centered around military type rules. But technically, it's not a foreign military shooting act. So now the burden of proof with regards to the terrorism label And this is why I was the guy a couple years ago that was like, let's not just throw that label out there willy-nilly because you could get problems. And this is one of those problems because now somebody feels justified to use military force. Is it suitable? Again, one of the clues that it potentially is not suitable is the fact that assets like this are not meant to go after pirogues. But anyway, we have 2 callers on the line. Trincity's first. Sorry, Trincity. Trincity's been waiting. Good morning, caller.
Good morning, Mr. Sean Michael Small. How are you going this morning? Okay, let's get our minds on something and let's get ourselves in a corridor of thought and understanding, right? The American U.S. government is about regime change in Venezuela. The United States government is going to use the nuances and the intricacies and the flaws in our border processes between Venezuela, Trinidad and Tobago, and the rest of the Caribbean as a springboard for regime change, and that's what it is. So let's establish that. The United States government cares nothing about drugs and drug smuggling within the region because the Central Intelligence Agency and the Federal Bureau of Investigations have infiltrated and have pushed drugs and cocaine and so on into the Black and Hispanic communities to keep them dismantled and disheveled. Those are facts that we must understand. The United States government is not interested in solving any drug problem because the largest drug market in the world. Okay, having said that, we must forget about what's going on we must shift our thinking from what's going on in Venezuela with regard to whether Maduro was indicted in a U.S. criminal court and with regard to Maduro being indicted by the Justice Department and so on. All that is fluff and foolishness. We have no evidence. It was not presented to an international criminal court. We don't have the evidence. We do not have the evidence of what takes place in a U.S. court or in a U.S. jurisdiction with regard to a foreigner being wanted in the U.S. for drug smuggling in his own country. The best they could come up with is he is a drug dealer sending drugs to the U.S. If he is, we do not know because there is no evidence. Trump's small pin, Rowley had a small pin. Trump have a small pin. Little Marco Rubio, you don't have the evidence. They do not know. The United States wants Venezuela's resources. That is the pattern of their structure. That is the pattern of their governance in terms of world domination, hegemony for the last 60 years. That is what they do. They dismantle governments, they dishevel governments, they instigate coups, finance coups to destabilize governments for their resources. Until us in Trinidad and Tobago, descendants of slaves, indentures, formal colonial people understand that our very existence as a colonial people is as a result of that U.S. hegemony and European hegemony. We just have to know it. Once we understand that, we must then design our foreign policy narrative to suit the particular situation. Our foreign policy narrative has to suit that particular situation. We cannot go saying we want the U.S. and thanks for the U.S. for bombing a boat, which nobody knew it had drugs in the boat. Nobody knew it had drugs in the boat. Where's the evidence? Nada, zilch, none. So we as a smaller nation, have to lightly with regard to what our foreign policy narrative should be. Now, granted, the Rowley administration did a total mess in not securing our borders. So we between a rock and a hard place, trying to play a balancing act with getting our borders secured and thanking the U.S. in a particular way to helping secure our borders. And the borders would be secured. But after Maduro is toppled and after they put in the new regime, and they start getting the resources out of Venezuela because Venezuela has large oil reserves and China mustn't get any of that. Once that is settled, we will go back to porous borders unless, of course, this government decides that we're not going to have our porous sea borders anymore. We're going to lock it down. So that is those are the facts. That is the discussion we have to have. How to protect ourselves against U.S. hegemony, understanding what goes on in the U.S. State Department, in the U.S. government, and the intelligence agencies with regard to the use of drugs. Once we understand that, then we in Trinidad and Tobago, a small nation, can protect ourselves from that kind of hegemony and regional nonsense. Have a good day, fellas. Take care.
Thank you, Gola. I will say this. First of all, I will always caution anybody that wants to bring up the past American politics. For better and worse, I would not judge Trump in the same way as though it's like the previous American administrations, right? It is colored both by his personality but also by the internal politics of that country, which has changed a lot over the last 9 years. Just case in point, freedom of speech is now championed by Republicans. Censorship is at least at some point, was championed by either Democrats or people who claim to be Democrats. Those are not exactly the same things. Supporters, etc., etc. Now, I do think they have intelligence on Maduro, but I'm like you. I'm trying to remember if I brought up the warrant or the conviction or whatever. Like, that court stuff on Maduro means nothing to me. It means absolutely nothing to me. The bounty, for the most part, means nothing to me, right? I find it kind of weird that they have that bounty, because who's going to actually... The bounty proves the point that I want to make with regards to regime change. I'm not saying that Americans don't want to do regime change, but what they're doing now is not going to cause regime change, right? Regime change would require not just removing Maduro, but more or less removing most of, if not all, of the players in his regime. Because if you remove him alone, you'll just get a successor. I mean, it didn't start with him, it started with Chavez. So, you would need a lot more force to get rid of everybody. Saber rattling, putting ships on the border to destabilize the situation, helping rebels. Anything short of an invasion has shown not to cause a regime change. Bush Sr. tried it. He told the Kurds, rise up. They didn't even support the Kurds. And Saddam crushed them. It kind of put them in a doomed situation, right? Sanctions does not cause regime change. Venezuela and North Korea has proven that. They will, as he is able to hold on to power internally, so pressure from the outside ain't going to cause regime change. Removal. But then if you just take out Maduro, and his second might continue on the nonsense. What could happen though is, in your version of events where America might get what it wants by removing Maduro, that doesn't necessarily mean regime change, and our problems might not be solved with the transnational crime. America's problems about the access to the oil might be solved because the next in line might be a bit more agreeable to America because they don't want to suffer the same consequences of Maduro if America goes after Maduro. But it wouldn't necessarily mean regime change, which means that our problems, if that is the outcome, won't be solved, right? For America to do regime change, I vehemently think history has shown us it would be invasion. Not necessarily occupation, but invasion for sure. And that would need a lot more assets than what we see currently off the coast of Venezuela. We have another call on the line. We'll take the call.
Good morning again, Sean.
Yes.
So now that cooler heads are prevailing, you know, I didn't mean to raise your blood pressure like that, but sometimes it's necessary.
Let me just say this. I don't have an issue with you disagreeing with me, but I did feel that you misrepresented my positions.
And hence the reason I keep saying, Sean, sometimes you need to go back and look at your program, because I go back and look at your programs because I am so interested and invested in you as a presenter. Sometimes I go back and look at your programs. Even after the mornings, I will go back in the night and when I'm perusing and look back at your programs and ingest some of what you see. And sometimes that is why I bring it up. But let me say this, going back to this issue quickly here. I don't disagree with regime change in Venezuela, you know. I don't disagree with it, you know. However, sometimes I think it needs to come internally, not by what the U.S. wants to do in what the U.S. seemingly wants to do, because that caller from Trin City is spot on. That's what they want to do. Now, look at regime change in Panama. The two areas where America intervened in this hemisphere with regime change directly, Grenada and Panama. I don't know if you know the history, but Grenada is more the better for that regime change that occurred. And the same thing in Panama. Panama would not be the country it is if they didn't remove what's his name?
Noriega, I think.
Not Manuel Noriega, and allow what happened to happen. So I don't think Venezuela would not benefit from Mr. Maduro being removed. However, you cannot go decide that you are the law and do whatever you want in the region, and that is my issue is in the region. Now let me say this about radar. One thing, Sean, you have one of these days I wish I could sit down with you and you understand who I am. Let me just say this: our radar in Trinidad and Tobago that we have upgraded. Is a combination of surveillance and weather. Our radar can pinpoint pirogues in pirogues, eh? Our radar can pinpoint pirogues. You think the U.S. don't have more sophisticated radars or not?
No. I know the U.S. does. But
the
question, caller, how far can we pinpoint pirogues?
Okay, our radar, I think we can go, is it 50 miles or 60 miles? We have for our region, for our area, we have a very good radar. It is surprising that the amount of smuggling and stuff is going on because our national security apparatus is in shambles. And sometimes I wonder if it's deliberate to permit this crap to be going on in Trinidad and Tobago. Because our radar, we have a very good radar here to deal with our national security issues.
Okay, let me be more specific, caller. Depending on where the pirogue was, it would have been too far for our radar to see it. We might still see
I'm not disputing
right.
I'm not disputing about our radar, Sean. I'm not disputing that. All I'm saying is that that could have been innocent people because of what I know goes on in trade with Venezuelan people and trade with Trinidad. You remember I said to you that people could have been going to the Dominican Republic because they do trade with that type of trade with the Dominican Republic. I have seen. Let me tell you how big those pirogues are, Sean. Some of those pirogues are as big as 45 feet. They're not small boats, so they need the power to move them through the water because they also have cargo. They have a lot of cargo in them. Right now, let me say this to you right now. Right now, happening in Trinidad, there is a system where Venezuelan citizens living in Trinidad and Tobago buy stuff to send down to their family in Venezuela. There's a system operated in South Trinidad here where those cargoes are packed and they look just as if you see what you saw, those little things that you saw on those boats. They look just like that because that's how they pack. I have seen the warehouse. That's right. I have seen the warehouses that they store these things in. So there's informal warehouses in South, and the pirogues that take them down look just like that. That take them down to Venezuela. They go through the Gulf of Paria. Some of them go along the coast of Venezuela. To say that, and that's my thing. To say that this issue was drugs, the American government. It is sad to see that they have to resort to this type of tactic to try and get regime change in Venezuela because it is very difficult to change Mr. Maduro. Very difficult. And innocent people should not be paying the price as because we don't know who those people were in that boat. Yeah. We just have to go by what America have said. what they have said, and based on what this just equipment that they have put in place in the Caribbean region to deal with quote unquote narco terrorism. Come on, man. Have a good day, Sean. And as I said, I'm in the raise your blood pressure, son. Okay.
Now,
have a good weekend.
Thanks,
I mean,
Paul.
a good day.
I still won't fully agree with you that I think boats exactly like that are used for trade, but
no.
But I don't know for sure. I don't know for sure.
Let me say this to you, Sean. Let me say this to you.
I don't know for sure.
This is why I'm saying this to you is because there are lots of things that I don't say on the television and I can't say on the television, but I have been involved in trade, in facilitating that type of trade with Venezuelan citizens, facilitating the trade.
All right.
There are many aspects of facilitating the trade, and that's why I could tell you the boats come to San Fernando, they come to Port of Spain, and they come to Chagarama.
I run out of time.
That is why I could tell you that.
So let's not get hung up on that. There's a couple of questions that the international community has not, or the national community has not necessarily addressed. One is, to what extent, I don't even know if we've really spoken about the question, and I thought about this when Trinity was talking, with regards to the Prime Minister's support over the American action. Do we agree with it? Do we not? I mean, there are certain practical things. We don't want to get more tariffs. We don't want to get on the bad side. We don't, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
But the Prime Minister should just be silent on these issues. This is an issue. This could have repercussions long past her time.
I think the problem is the criticisms of the Prime Minister are not in the right angles and are not asking the right questions on the appropriateness.
I agree.
Right? All right. But the last thing about regime change, I'll say this. I don't think internal regime change could happen. There is reasons to think that the last election was very much blatant corruption.
That should have been the tipping point at the time.
And the people didn't do it. The people didn't do it because once a dictatorship reaches a certain point with military control, notice he has a 4-star general in what should be a civilian oversight role. That's usually a good stance where the military is part of the regime, which means they're incentivized to keep the regime up. Saddam was in power because the Republican Guard, to some extent, was the minority Muslim sub-demographic. I can't remember which one it is. And because of that, because they were the minority, they had an incentive. We need to keep this man up because we are the minority. Once they remove Saddam, the differences in the religions, in these different sides of Islam in Iraq, that was part of what was going on there with the whole. America wasn't fighting a war. They were in the way of a war, right? But the thing is, a separate observation, it's interesting to note, America is regularly, as far as I remember, criticized about Panama, but not so much Grenada. And I do wonder if to some extent, if the narratives around it in part are affected by the politics of the regions, Panama being Latin America, Grenada being Caribbean.
Well, I think with respect to Grenada, I have sat down with Grenadians in Grenada who were hunted by Erigeri just for their views, just for voicing their views. And we're talking about since that time. And when Maurice Bishop and they decided that when they came in, it was just another side of the same coin. And Grenada really needed the proper democracy. And fortunately, that is what Eugenia Charles felt and gave support that caused this thing to happen. And I was totally in favor because there were people in Grenada hiding out. I know people. I have friends whose families came from Grenada to hide in Trinidad because they were being hunted by Maurice Bishop and they. They were being hunted by Maurice Bishop and they for no good reason other than having a different opinion. So you know.
So
It is what it is, boy, Sean. I say one of these days I will come and take you for a coffee, and we will discuss things off the television.
Right.
You have a good day.
I'll close with this. This American government, like I said before, you have to kind of judge it in a separate space. It's like its own thing. There might never be one like it for a long time after. Even if it is somebody in the current administration is the next Republican candidate that wins, it won't be quite the same. Trump is such a loaded figure, positive, negative, what have you, right? I do see a world where he thinks that he's just going to deal with the drug cartels. And maybe he's going to deal with Maduro as he believes him to be a drug baron and then leave it at that. That is a possibility. That is a possibility because it's the whole thing about the border wall and his issues with Mexico and the drug trade out of Mexico. Like, he's not a normal politician who's looking at it from a political lens, and it has its good points and bad points. I don't think you're going to get internal regime change. So then the question is there enough to justify external regime change? And to some extent, one could argue there is, but then why bring the drug part into it? It actually kind of cheapens the overall situation. The thing is, America has not been good at regime change. They tend to miss more than hit because it's not the removal. The change, the first part is removal. The second part is the replacement, and the replacement is where you get a problem. And if you don't have anybody capable of being the replacement, now maybe in Venezuela, there's two things going that makes regime change in Venezuela a lot more possible. One is that they do have, generally speaking, a democratic system of government already in place with an opposition that's willing and able. That the population might actually accept. One of the problems with Iraq was that the population wasn't necessarily accepting some of those people to lead them, right? The other thing is this. Usually when you have regime change, you're worried about the instability for the region. One could argue Venezuela has caused instability in the region for a long time. So some of the negatives we've already experienced anyway. You know, you're not going to get double instability. It is unstable or it's not unstable. It could get worse, yes. But to what extent would it get worse? This is not like before when Iraq was heavily suppressed and under an extremely tight fist under Saddam Hussein. And it had a lot of external pressure to cause the situation to devolve further. Venezuela is slightly different. So you can't necessarily say exactly what happened in Afghanistan and Iraq is what's going to happen here. And there are indicators to think that that might not be the case. So this could be a time when America could do regime change and it would work out, like with Greendot, like with essentially World War II was regime change of Japan and Germany and Italy. But Italy kind of stole Mussolini under the bus themselves, right? They kind of did it internally, whereas Japan and Germany, you had to force them as an external power up even till the end. You still had to do it. They weren't going to surrender per se. And Venezuela might be in that same situation where it's too ingrained now, the government, the high court, the military, etc., they are part of the regime. So regime change would mean having to replace all of that. And to do all of that would mean an invasion. And here's the real key. Will Colombia and Panama be enough, or will Trinidad be involved? Because the eastern side of Venezuela, where the closest, easiest logistical support hub. The Prime Minister did say she's not part of an alliance. At the end of the day, we don't really know what the Americans want to do or not. This is an unprecedented situation, so not only does it leave with a lot of questions, but it has a lot of implications, positive and negative. With regards to, it doesn't have to even be normal trade. Most of the human smuggling, you could argue, while they're illegal immigrants, they didn't do anything necessarily to warrant being shot at and killed. So, and that was one of my fears, where you have some people that think, oh, I'm just going to go to a better life, whether legally or illegally, come to Trinidad and Tobago, and maybe they were on the wrong boat at the wrong time because they just got blown up. One of the callers did have, just to close, that question about why they didn't intercept the boat. I don't know if they asked that directly, but that's what I took from the question. It would have been better if they did. It would have been better if they did. And I think that's the angle that I'm curious about. Why are the rules of engagement are what they are? I gave a scenario of why I think they shot at it. That doesn't necessarily mean that it was good of them to shoot at it. And is that a sign of what the rules of engagement are moving forward? And then the real question is, some people say, oh, it might escalate and may get crossed in the crossfire. Forget that. Forget that escalation from that angle. It might escalate, and then the lines in the sand politically, and maybe we'll go into it more tomorrow because I didn't get to that whole part of the story. The lines in the sand politically, the Prime Minister might be trying to get ahead of it, and maybe she doesn't have to now, or maybe things might devolve and it's good that she got ahead of it. But the lines in the sand politically between all of the various international interests, that's where the escalation could be, where if we think things are fractured now and people are picking sides now, because America might start to make more demands. This is the thing. Trump, he might mean what he says, going after drug cartels, but he might go further and further diplomatically to get what he wants. And do we wait out his term and hope that the next guy is not going to have the same policies, or do we try to work with him, depending on how reasonable or unreasonable his demands are? You know, it could be in the form of more tariffs, it could be in the form of sanctions, who knows? Who knows, right? This is one of the reasons why it would have been better for them to capture the boat rather than sink it, but it seems like this is what they're going to do. And now, anybody that wants to operate pirogues, if you're a fisherman, I don't think they'll sink you. But if you're taking toothpaste and food and clothing, and I said it, you'll probably wrap it up in plastic and just like what Mr. Sanford said. To a drone or to a helicopter, to a P-8 Poseidon, or to an F-35, even with IR cameras, optics, packages look like packages. Stack packages look like stack packages. So that could be one of the reasons why they only revealed the footage that they revealed. We don't know to what extent there's more information that they have that they don't want to declassify. It's a hell of a time. It's a hell of a time. Regime change in Venezuela, I myself wouldn't disagree with it, but we would get more indicators in advance before that happens. One does not deploy a military at the snap of our fingers to do something on that scale. All right, with that said, way over time, close out the show. I'm still not finished with this topic. The international diplomacy part of it is right now in some ways more interesting to me. Might get into that tomorrow. Should have the TBS media ambassador tomorrow. Apologies for not having a show yesterday. This is talking about the WSND Contact Capital Show, Michael Small. Thankful to all of the callers. Again, you could disagree with me. I still think I was misrepresented, but I'm just being somewhat facetious now. But that's fine. Sometimes you have to be willing to be passionate and stubborn. Hopefully, never forget, it's nice to be nice. And in this case, with what happened today, yeah, you could get heated, but then come back. And I appreciate Mr. San Fernando for calling me back. In the meantime, stay safe. Remember your allegiance to the Republic and to each other, despite the fact that it seems that the politicians are playing games, so just about everything they could touch and speak about. I guess, you know what, I'm willing, I might be willing to sacrifice quite a bit in certain areas for the killing to stop here in TNT. And I hope that that happens so that we could see each other tomorrow. Bye-bye.
WESN.
Good morning and welcome back to Dollars and Cents. I'm Darren Jacobs, a senior financial advisor, and I'm here to guide you through smart financial decisions that can protect your wealth and boost your bottom line. On today's episode, I'll be discussing a misunderstood topic of personal financial planning and the role of an advisor. Now,